Zobelle has entered attack mode, while Clay is being petty, and Hale has finally chosen a side. Hi, and welcome to Belated Binge, the podcast that doesn't take itself or the show too seriously. My name's Zach. I'm your host, here to let you relive your favorite series that I nearly missed out on, like Sons of Anarchy, which I didn't watch for the first time until like 4 years or so after the series finale. Today, we are on season 2, episode 5, called Smite.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Before we dig into the episode, there will be spoilers, probably some language. There will definitely be adult situations. Use earbuds as necessary. Shout out to the Bonus Binge Squad on Patreon, patreon.com/belatedbinge. If you forgot, in our last episode, Gemma was the victim of a new intimidation tactic by Zobelle, but couldn't bring herself to kill Weston while he was on the phone with his kid. The club made their first gun run under the new agreement with the IRA, and nothing at all went according to plan. Jackson Clay nearly came to blows. Tig was run off the road by Bobby and was nearly escorted to Oregon by bounty hunters. Today, we continue our binge, like I said, into season 2, episode 5, called Smite, which I will start by trying to spin somehow into a love story. In this one, quick peek behind the curtain, I didn't write anything down. So we're just winging it. If, of course, you find yourself riding on a rim and you take your car to the local repair shop, the only thing that you can hope for is a knight in shining armor to save the day. Actually, just to save your wheel, because you've actually kind of got this thing figured out. You're a single mom. You just need to get your kid to school, and you need a tire that actually works. But luckily, the knight in shining armor who shows up is wearing leather and a little beanie hat thing and has a beard, and you think he's cute. And who knows? Who knows where this love story might lead? For Lila, the answer is right into Opie's arms. Yeah, that was terrible. I should write things down next time. Before we do anything else, I'm going to apologize for what just happened. Now, let's jump into the episode, which opens with that little meet cute that I just butchered the description of because it was the only thing lovey-dovey that I could think of about this particular episode. For now, it's pretty much nothing, but it does plant several seeds. First is the obvious attraction between the two characters, and her giving Opie her number is kind of an obvious sign that she's single and interested. Lila being a single mom with a son the same age as Opie's kid is like a connection that this thing can blossom from, which is something I should have used for that rom-com intro thing that I did off the fly. The paraphernalia, though, that he spots in the floor of the passenger seat, that's going to come up later when he needs to hook up with a drug dealer. From there, we basically have 3 main plot points that we're going to follow throughout the episode. The first one is the Clay versus Zobelle, and by extension, the club versus the Aryans. Then we have the Gemma still dealing with her attack. And then we have the Hale choosing a side. Through those 3 storylines, we get a lot of overlaps and Easter eggs and foreshadowing and allegiances, and might I say, even a little bit of bonding. Let's start with the Gemma storyline. Kind of like last episode, her role is really heavy, but her scenes are fairly short. And while they're pivotal, there's not a whole lot of, there's not a ton of screen time to really go through. So I guess we start with the day, or the way that she starts her day. Good place as any to start. I think I'm just delaying because it's awkward because we start off with an update on her vagina, which is apparently very stiff, which is a description I've never once associated with a vagina in my life. And it's also apparently very dry. That one I've heard of. She then gets a little I know you know kind of chat with Jax about JT's old book. Remember the book? The book that we learned about in season 1 and was kind of a big deal and we sort of thought it disappeared there for a second? Well, it's back in the picture. And it has a cool little connection because later in the episode, both Gemma and Tara, the women of Jax's life, are both reading JT's book. The big thing for Gemma, though, is that when Tara goes with her to the store to get some vagina cream, she spots the blonde chick that lured her out of her car the night that she was attacked. And Gemma chases her. Doesn't catch up before the blonde's ride shows up, almost as if that ride was planned, which, of course, it was. The blonde was actually planting a broken down minivan in the parking lot and had Weston come picking her up. And when Tara catches up to Gemma, she reaches out and puts her hand on her shoulder, and Gemma throws just a wicked bow and breaks Tara's nose. This event lands them both at the hospital with Tara getting patched up, or well, she's already patched up, but she starts to open up to Gemma a little bit about how she needs to talk to somebody, and she tells her at least part of the Agent Cone story, and then sends her to the shrink under the threat of assault charges if she doesn't go. She's doing this kind of tongue in cheek, but it is, for Gemma's own good. She's like, look, you've got to talk to somebody before you kill somebody. Like, you just broke my nose. Gemma, however, does not follow through with the session. What she does is read some of JT's book. And then she goes to visit Clay at the clubhouse and starts to actually show him some physical affection again. And this honestly feels a little bit out of place. It's just kind of feels like an excuse to get her to the big bang at the end of the episode, but we're not there yet. We'll get to that. But that's kind of the gist of Gemma's storyline. Like I said, there's not a ton of screen time necessarily, but there is a lot of weight that it carries over on the overarching story, which makes a lot of sense because season 2 is Gemma's season. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is Gemma's series, but I guess that's what happens when you're married to the showrunner. Let's talk about this Hale storyline. He's a popular guy in this episode. He's got lots of visitors, and it starts with Zobelle and Weston. And they're there to provide evidence that Sam Crow blew up a residence in Charming. They have a DVD with a video of Opie blowing up the meth lab that Zobelle had Darby set up. And when Hale kind of pushes back on this, they give him a second DVD, which shows himself receiving an envelope from Darby on camera at the same house earlier in the day. And we remember back to that episode. It was initiated by Darby, and the envelope contained a coupon for the grand opening of Zobelle's cigar shop or whatever. But that doesn't matter. This was all done intentionally for this moment right now. Zobelle had always planned to blackmail Hale and making it look on tape like he was accepting a bribe at a meth lab. Zobelle is playing chess. Hale's next visit comes from Jax, who's there to confront him about burying that meth lab intel, which never made sense for Hale's character. But he did do that. Jax uses what happened to Otto as an example of why Hale can't trust Zobelle. He also brings up what happened to Donna as a reason that Hale needs to start looking beyond his hatred of the club. And his final visit in this episode comes after he arrests the Sam Crow members who were fighting with the Aryan guys in the main plot point that we're going to talk about in a minute. But for now, we're focused on his chat with Unser. Unser basically accuses him of being in bed with Zobelle, and this leads to a confrontation about Unser being a hypocrite because of how close he is with Clay in the club. And I kind of love this response that Unser has. He basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, yeah, that's why you're here. You're the good guy. If you get dirty, then this whole place is fucked. He then confides in Hale what happened to Gemma. And he uses this as a way to illustrate the kind of people that Zobelle and his crew really are. And Hale emerges from this sit down and makes a decision. He first lets the Aryan and those guys go, and then he lets out the club members, but he holds Jack and Clay back for a minute. And he uses this time to show them first the photo evidence that Zobelle had already given him from when Weston was following Clay to the meeting that he had with Leroy from the 19ers in the first episode of this season. He also gives them the DVD that's got Opie's face on it, blowing up the meth house. And here's where he takes it one step further. He basically tells them that his brother is full of shit and is pulling a dirty deal on Oswald, which Clay later uses to help Oswald keep his land. Hale had a really big episode, and I think that makes him a really good character to put our, let's call it shining a headlight on in a little bit. But first, we got to get to the main plot point, the big one for the episode. And it's this Clay versus Zobelle feud. And when I say that Zobelle has been playing chess, Clay isn't even playing checkers. He's playing that old computer game. I think it was called Minesweeper. If you don't remember the game, it's one where you click these tiles. You pull it up. It almost kind of looks like, but it's just all these blank squares that look like tiles, and you click on them, and then they flip over and show you what's underneath. You only had two options: nothing or a bomb. Clay's playing that, but he's playing it like it's his first time ever playing it. Just kind of clicking buttons everywhere, not realizing he's going to end up with a bomb that blows up in his face or someone's. At the very beginning of this episode, after some pettiness that he throws at Jax for just because, Clay walks into Zobelle's cigar shop and puffs his chest out like he owns the place. You know, he's real suave about it. And he tries to extort Zobelle for protection money, like he's some kind of mob boss. He just watched The Godfather and got this idea, and he's like, let's go get some cigars. He steals 4 boxes of cigars, which he gives to everyone outside except for Jax, because pettiness. And that sets this whole shitstorm in motion. Zobelle greenlights an inside, I'm using air quotes for those of you that can only hear this, plan that turns out to be Otto getting jumped by like 3 Aryan dudes. And the one guy takes it a step further than he was instructed to, as he stabs Otto through the eye. Yeah, I've seen this show multiple times. I know what is going to happen, and it still hurts me. Gah. But that's just the tip of the mop head. Just kidding. Iceberg, is that a better one? Mop head. That's insensitive, right? Right. Something he clearly already had in the works, right? Because all he said was the inside plan is a go or whatever. Like or green light on the inside. I can't remember the exact quote, but that was something they already had prearranged. And so was the part where he went to visit Hale with that meth lab evidence that I mentioned earlier. Like, he wouldn't have been planting that evidence in the first place if it wasn't part of a plan that he already had in place. But now he's pissed off. So the shitstorm is only beginning. The way that he's decided to humble Clay is by setting in motion another plan. And this one is explosive. And it weaves into that Gemma plot line that I mentioned earlier. He sends the blonde girl, who we learn in this episode is his daughter, to stage a van broken down in a parking lot that just so happens to be at the store that Gemma and Tara were in. You know, getting the vagina cream. Hence the blonde running and Gemma chasing and breaking Tara's nose. Remember that from 5 minutes ago? But that van is there because the club runs the towing and car repair service in town. And when they come to pick it up and bring it back to the shop, we see which button Clay pressed. The one with the bomb. But not before we have a vote. You see, throughout the episode, we saw the democratic nature of Sam Crow. Clay has a meeting with Oswald where he learns about that land deal that smells a little fishy and says he'll look into it for him. But it's mostly here to just show us that how Opie is still siding with Clay. And they're trying to figure out him, Tig, Clay, they're trying to figure out who in the club they need to persuade to vote with Clay later on. The gist of this all is simple. Clay wants to retaliate against Zobelle for Otto's jumping immediately, and Jax wants to wait and plan so they don't run into a trap. And we see Jax lobbying the other club members throughout the episode. And while he's discussing it with Bobby and Piney, that's when he learns about Tara and he heads to the hospital. And that's where we get to see Tara interact with her boss, who is accusing Jax of putting his hands on her because of her broken nose. And Jax giving Gemma a ride home as she's skipping out on the shrink appointment that she was supposed to go to, right? That's how these things are interwoven. And now with Gemma on the back, he rides up just in time to try to stop yet another part of Zobelle's plan. In this case, it's the Opie faction of the club that's about to throw down in the middle of Main Street with the Aryan crew. And Jax tries to intervene with this and keep the peace and says a street brawl is not, the answer that they need and isn't going to lead to anything good. But that's when Weston shoves his bike over and Jax ends up being the one to throw the first punch in said street brawl. And that's how they all wound up in jail. And that's also how Gemma witnesses it and drives her to read JT's book. Once he's out of jail, Jax heads home and finds Tara, who's upset, in Abel's room, and she gives him kind of the most ominous warning of the series with the most painful foreshadowing imaginable. As she's telling Jax about her struggles to find her place in this life with him, with the club, with Gemma, who just broke her nose, the violence that she witnesses, and not to mention how often she ends up patching up bullet holes, but she didn't even bring that up. But she said something to the effect of, I can't help but shake this feeling that something bad is going to happen to him. And the him is pointing at Abel. And my soul hurt. If you're rewatching, you know why. It's foreshadowing the final episode of this season. And that is the worst episode in the series in terms of emotional turmoil. But Jax doesn't know the future, not the real one. Anyways, what he knows is the future that he's hoping to build. and he goes to get JT's book and hands it to Tara for her to read. And he tells her his plan to get the club away from all the things that she's afraid of. Well, it ain't going to happen today, clearly. After we get our split vote on retaliation, which I guess means that Jax wins, and they decide to wait for said retaliation, the girls show up, and everyone is just sort of drained. Bobby gives Clay a speech about protecting the club, and that's why he voted the way that he did. And Gemma comes in to talk to Clay. And this is where Clay, I had forgotten about this from like every rewatch I've ever done. This was gross. Clay gives her this like monologue about Jax, how he might be more like his real dad than they thought, and about how Clay is just keeps trying to bring him close, and he just wants Jax to love him. And it's all horse shit. At the end of just one episode ago, he told him to his face he would kill him. He's been a petty little bitch with him the whole episode. And now he's going to lie to Gemma's face and play victim about your son just doesn't love me? Give me a break. But all of this is just an excuse to get everyone at the clubhouse so that the final domino can fall and blow up in Clay's face. Well, Chibs' face. Because he's the one that goes to get the van, the one that just got towed into the lot. And he, with a military background, recognizes the sound of the explosive priming, and he jumps out, starts running away, gets about 3 or 4 steps away, and the van blows up. And the episode ends with Tara giving him CPR as he lays in a pool of his own blood from his head. And while that's the whole episode in a nutshell, I do have one question about this ending. How did the blonde get the van to the parking lot without setting off the bomb? Are we meant to believe that whatever she was doing when Gemma spotted her was actually arming the bomb? Is she an explosives expert like Opie? And why didn't it go off before getting to the garage? An abandoned van in a parking lot. Nobody tries to start it before it gets towed? Sure, okay. I guess you could say that she drove it there with the bomb in place and she had a specific thing to do to activate it without blowing herself up or being noticed in a busy parking lot, which she was and had to run away from. So she must have just gotten it done in the nick of time, I guess. And I guess you could say that she or Zobelle called the tow truck company themselves and informed them that it wouldn't start. And that's why nobody tried to start it before calling. And I guess you could say that the guy who showed up in the tow truck was just going through the motions of his day and just hooked it up and took it to the garage without trying to do any sort of diagnostic or trying anything in the parking lot first that could possibly distress the bomb. But I think this is a lot of I guesses to make the plan work out without blowing up innocent people in this town and making sure that it actually gets exactly where you wanted it to go before it goes boom. I would find it more believable if there was somebody in a car across the street with a remote trigger. But if that was the case, would it have been initiated by Chibs in the way that it was? Or would that person wait until it was actually in the garage or there were more people, more club members close to it before hitting the button and making it go boom? You know, ensuring maximum damage and not just one running away Chibs to worry about? I don't know. It struck me as odd. It seemed like a razor thin wire for this thing to be, for this plan to go off without going horribly wrong. But maybe that's just me. Before we shine one headlight on one specific character, I'd like to ask you to please leave a 5-star review in the podcast app that you're using right now. And if it allows for a comment with your review, I would love it if you would say something nice. Not only would it make me feel all special, but it would also help to tell the algorithms to let some new people hear it. And if you're on YouTube, same request right down below. Like button, comment section, please. So for this character headlights session, we are going to be talking about Hale. And this character is really starting to develop at this point in the show. And I just wanted to spend a little time kind of catching up on our sheriff-to-be. He started out as I guess he's already a sheriff, isn't he? Police chief of the sheriffs-to-be? I don't know. He started out as the anti-Jax, a foil to the club. He would do anything to hurt Sam Crow. Or at least we thought. Really, he's just a local kid who grew up to be a cop and try to keep his hometown safe. In his eyes, Sam Crow's doing bad shit and bringing bad shit to his town and putting the general public in danger. And the more he tries to get rid of them, the more he realizes that maybe they actually aren't that bad. Let us review. In season 1, he starts off by buddying up to Agent Cone, who claims to be there to arrest the club for gun charges. Well, it turns out that he's actually a psycho stalker who's there for Tara. He and Jax, he being Hale, sort of partner up to deal with that particular problem, and yet Cone still nearly rapes Tara before Jax blows his head off to get rid of that particular problem. But Hale's not done there. He's also fucking Agent Stahl, who actually is there to shut the club down for gun distribution. And by the time he pulls his face out between her legs, he sees how dirty she's playing it and gets kicked out of the whole thing. She's already set in motion her plan to set up Opie to look like a rat in hopes that it's going to cause him to flip on Bobby for the murder charges and the club for the gun stuff. And that doesn't go as planned either. Clay orders a hit on Opie and Tig murders Donna by mistake. So he's 0 for 2 so far in making alliances in hopes to get rid of Sam Crow. And each time, it brings him a little bit closer to maybe flipping his opinion of them in some sort of way. In this episode, he agrees to Jax that he will keep the secret, or not this episode, in this season. He agrees with Jax that he will keep the secret from Opie that both of them suspect Clay to be responsible for his wife's murder. In this Jax and Hale sort of relationship or partnership, or at least like cordial correspondence, continues throughout the season. And when Jax pushes for the club to let Hale and the cops deal with the whole Darby meth lab problem, you think it's gonna actually solidify them a little bit more. But Hale's still not there yet. While he doesn't agree to work with Zobelle, he also doesn't actively shut it down, to the point where he lets the meth lab go, which leads us to the events of our current episode. He finds himself in quite the pickle, yet again. Zobelle is blackmailing him and pressing him to go after the club for the meth lab explosion. Jax and Unser are pressing him for working with Zobelle. And he gets blasted by the information that this group that he's been on the fence about is 100 times worse than the club that he's trying to get rid of. For what it's worth, though, even without the information about Gemma, I'm not sure that Hale would have ever actively helped Zobelle, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't have continued to sort of look the other way or to cover his own ass with the new blackmail piece of the puzzle. But in this moment, This is the straw that kind of breaks. He finally has chosen a side. And you know that because he confides in Clay. This is the first time he's done that. Like I said, we've seen him and Jax work together as if the show was laying the groundwork for a future partnership between these two, and almost as the idea making sense, right? Having Jax, who you are presumably grooming to become the replacement for Clay at the head of the table for SOA, and you've got Hale, who's supposed to be taking over for Unser as chief of police. These two strike up a friendship or a bond or an established agreement as they elevate, and eventually we reach Clay and Unser working together. But this is different than that. He despises Clay, and he puts that shit aside and shows his hand. It's almost like he's clearing the ledger. He's showing them part of Zobelle's plan, basically what he knows about it. The only thing he really leaves out is his own blackmail. And then, as an olive branch, he adds in the bonus of the dirty land deal that goes against his own brother. Almost as if to reinforce that he's not choosing sides, even family. But in doing so, he is, because he's certainly not doing anything active to help the others. Now, would he have taken this step if it wasn't for Gemma? That's where I don't think so. I think he probably still would have worked with Jax on and off, even if it wasn't for the Gemma piece of this. But Gemma is Jax's mom and Clay's wife. It's not lost on me or anyone that those are the two guys that he talks to and decides to help in this moment, like immediately in the aftermath of Unser sharing that bit of information. He talks to them both together. And it's setting the stage for the rest of the season where we see he and Jax continue to develop their chemistry. But right now, by including Clay and really talking to Clay, that's where it seems like he's picked his side, at least in this particular battle. All right, next, let's do some good and not so good accolades. I've decided to do these by highlighting positive characters in kind of true biker fashion with some new patches. We had those in the last episode. And we're going to say fuck off to some others in true Sons of Anarchy fashion. They're getting bullets. That part is new. I gave it a brandy little name. What do you think? Yeah, I know. All right, so for the patches, we're going to start with Bobby for voting the right way. It's wild to me that there is such a rift between Jax and Clay that they actually need to lobby the other members for votes to basically agree with each other. You're fighting over timing. What would the retaliation plan be if Clay wins right now? Just walk out the door and go beat up Zobelle? They would have to have some kind of plan for retaliation to be, what did he say? What did he call it? Like fierce and immediate or something like that? Like, there would still have to be a plan. Isn't that all that Jax is really advocating for? Not being idiots, retaliating with a plan, doing some due diligence about your enemy and using that in your plan and protecting yourself from the blowback that is likely to come with a plan, going up against a guy that you have clearly seen has a plan. I don't know. This seems, what do I know? I'm just a guy watching a TV show. The next patch we're going to give out is to Tara for being there for Gemma, even when it breaks her nose. Literally. And finally, I've got a patch for Hale for coming through for the club with not only the Zobelle intel, or at least a little bit of clarity about Zobelle, but also the land grab deal that his own brother was pulling. He didn't have to do that. And he did. And that is awesome. It also gives them the chance to establish a little bit more of Clay and Oswald's relationship, because that thing is going to bloom and blossom as the seasons go on as well. Oswald is actually going to become very, very important for the club in not that long. It's not going to take that long at all. But we'd be here all day. We'd be here all day. And we don't need to do that. What we need to do is give out some bullets. And we're going to start with Hale's brother, the other Hale, the slime ball. Not only is Zobelle in town because of him, but now he's also trying to pull a scam to force Oswald into selling his land so that he can line his pockets with a housing development deal. All of this that is happening in this season is actually his fault. The next bullet that we're going to fire is the Aryan that stabbed Otto in the eye. He didn't have to do that. That was very personal. And it sucked. Always sucks to watch that one. The final bullet that we are going to fire off is actually for Clay, for being an idiot and instigating this whole thing. While Hale's brother is technically to blame for all of it, Clay is pretty much to blame for everything since. He's just puffing out his chest to Zobelle with no idea who he's dealing with and what repercussions could be. You've got Otto's eye, the fight in the street, which he was happy about, Chibs getting blown up, all brought on by Clay's hubris. And hell, you could even argue that what happened to Gemma was avoidable, but it's kind of hard to put the blame fully on Clay for that one because they did it immediately after the first meeting. And obviously, Clay didn't even know who these guys were, but perhaps if Clay conducts himself slightly differently in that meeting, step one in their plan might not have been going after his wife. Who knows? We will never know because Clay only knows one speed, and that is straightforward, full steam ahead, and violent. And that's not been helpful. Before we go, let's rewrite Sons of Anarchy one small change to each episode at a time. For this episode, what if Bobby had voted with Clay? Would they have gone right out and after Zobelle then and there? Would someone other than Chibs perhaps have gotten into the van? What other trap might have been laid out for them already? Comment on YouTube below. Let me know on social media at Belated Binge, or there is an exclusive Facebook group for listeners of the podcast. You can tell me your thoughts in there. The best responses might even find their way into a future episode of this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, re-binging Sons of Anarchy, give me a follow or a subscribe on whatever app that you're using right now. Thank you so much for being here. And remember, life is short, so buy the motorcycle. But when you do, wear a helmet. Dress for the slide, not the ride, and make sure that you're taking Belated Binge along for that ride.